Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and the reason I'm making this video is the Airwindows ConsoleX console is now available on Yaeltex, which is where I got it from. So the deal with this is if you are the person who is going to want this, then you probably know who you are. You should be interested in Airwindows console if this makes any sense to you. Otherwise, you're best advised to, I don't know, just sit and enjoy the ASMR qualities of me talking to you over the microphone rather than paying such close attention. But it might give you a bit of a head start on what ConsoleX even is. So let's start with, what is this thing? This is a control surface. Nothing more, nothing less. All it does is send MIDI CC messages into your DAW. I've got it set up so that it'll use a thing called Airwindowmation, which I've been working on, and I have an update for, which by the time you see this video, it should be available in the old school download of the ConsoleX system. Because ConsoleX exists both as old-fashioned plugins that are nothing but a pile of sliders, and the audio is the same, and as a more complicated modern juice-based GUI plugins, which the plugins are resizable and they reflow and they have all these different, there's a meter built into them and all that kind of stuff, but they'll both work with this. Meaning, if you have a really retro computer, but you can still run the old school VST2 or audio unit plugins, and both of those exist in retro form and modern signed plugin form, then you can use the control surface. Now, the control surface is a pretty fancy thing, but again, the point I'm making, this does nothing but send MIDI control messages. All of this stuff. It might look very fancy and complicated, but all it's going to do is send MIDI control messages, so it could work with any DAW or any system. It doesn't have to be ConsoleX, but it's designed to fit along with every control in ConsoleX. And I'll go over the details on that now. Up at the top here, we've got a set of knobs which have color-coded blue. Note that if you buy it, it won't come with these colors all over it because I had used vinyl electrical tape to label everything. And that's part of my concept for it, but it doesn't come with the electrical tape. You need to get it or get paint or something if you want it to work that way. It also doesn't come with these wedge-shaped markings, and that can make it a little bit more difficult to see what the knobs are doing. But, do what you can to make it work for you. These are all sends. The way I've got it set up is that I use the ConsoleX system in Reaper and assign all of this stuff using the Reaper MIDI controls to go for whatever track is selected. And that means you have to click on the track to select it and be cautious of what you click on in the arrange window in order to go through and assign all of these little things to the relevant places in the ConsoleX system, including stuff like the sends are actually part of Reaper's send system. So you assign those also to selected tracks. A neat thing about that is if you select multiple tracks, including I think it's non-contiguous tracks, but if you select multiple tracks, they'll all get affected the same way by each knob, meaning that you can group together a bunch of guitar sounds, for instance, and dial in your guitar tone with all of them at the same time, which can be a good time saver for things. In any case, these are effect sends. There's 4 effect sends. My way of using that is to have the effect sends go to other channels in the same mix. So the other channels are also going through instances of ConsoleX channel. And so I put console 9 bus at the top of that channel to decode what we're sending, or at least to some extent decode what we're sending. And then apply reverb, or in some cases I've got flutter assigned to all wet, and they just have a wow and pitch bendy thing going on. And the sends will manage what's getting run to those additional channels. Right below that, I've got the high pass and low pass. And I chose the larger knob to be the low pass and the smaller knob to be the high pass, so you can kind of distinguish between them. They're in the same place. Literally on the other side, we've got a pan control and discontinuity. Discontinuity I've labeled in a red. And that's the thing that gives you sonic cues for how loud the sound seems to be. And that's part of what a ConsoleX mix can use in order to get a convincing, like, big studio sound, because it's not only the control surface or the studio console, it's also being able to record stuff loud and mic it and get a sound that is coming through actual air rather than be all DI and stuff. Up here I've got compression and gating in the ConsoleX system. Gating is colored green, which is a SSL style color association. And the compression is just colored white, which is also a SSL association. You'll notice that there are two banks of them, and that's because it has to do with these controls, stone, fire, and air, and also range here. And that is the Kalman filter stuff that I've developed, where you've got like a fire band, a stone band, and an air band. The air band is very effective for super high, airy presence band type stuff. And that's because Stonefire, what this part is based on, is good at being able to highlight that particular detail. And so it goes in its own separate space. I've got them color-coded to yellow, orange, and purple. Again, if you buy this control surface, it doesn't come with color tape on it. You have to put that on yourself. And we've got separate compression and gating for the fire and stone bands. Now you can take the range control, turn it all the way down, meaning that fire band is now carrying most of the sound, and stone band barely has anything. And if you're wondering how much of that is going to matter, what you can do is you turn it all the way down, then turn these guys to nothing, turn stone up, and then start seeing at what point do you hear low frequencies, bass and stuff coming through. Remembering that since it's Kalman filters, it's not just a simple crossover, it's not just simply bass. It's kind of like a spotlit, slightly grungy version of it's like an expanded version of what sub bass there is. So you can highlight kick drum weight using this, and you can also highlight kick drum weight using this, put the other two back, and then use a gate on only the kick drum weight, shortening the sustain of that low frequency sound. And this is all stuff that you can do with your classic big consoles like SSLs and such back in the 80s and 90s when that was a huge deal, or late 70s and 80s. And that is also what we do here, because these EQs, they're joysticks with this little bank of stuff in there as well, but they're doing essentially the same job as the parametric EQs on an SSL console, in that there's a bass channel, a low mid, a high mid, and a treble, all independently operatable. And you can boost it by pushing the joysticks up, or cut by pushing the joysticks down, and side to side controls the frequency. This turns out to be a nice way of dialing in stuff like that. Even if you weren't using ConsoleX, you could probably come up with ways of assigning these to a standard SSL-style desk or whatever SSL-style plugin you were using. Up and down is booster cut. Side to side is your frequency. And this is Q. This is the resonance. And akin to how the SSL consoles did it, if you turn it up, you're broadening the reference, the resonance. If you're turning it down, you're tightening it, because it's along the lines of turning something up gives you more, whether it's wider resonance or whether it's increasing the gain. And then using it this way, you get to have one control manipulate both the loudness and the frequency, which can make it quicker to dial in a sound. It's more, I don't know if I'd call it intuitive, but as far as quickly dialing in something, it's really kind of nice to do. And as you can see, they're not falling all over the place. I've specified ones. They don't have a spring returning them to the center because that would ruin the effect, but they'll stay where you put them. My hope is that as they get older, they will continue to be sitting where you put them, but they're doing a pretty good job. You can see that I have the whole thing sitting on what is actually a amp stand. I'm going to have a look. What this says, this is I've got a separate one here, is Gator Frameworks. It's an amp stand, and I've got electrical tape holding the bottom edge on so that it sits nice and stable. So that sends the compression and gating. The compression and gating is two separate bands, fire and stone, and you get to use that separately. We've got our pan, we've got our discontinuity, and we've got our parametric EQs. The hope is that it's all in a useful position where that can easily be understood. And again, bear in mind that maybe if you use completely different things, you can still come up with stuff to assign these to, because all of these knobs could be assigned to anything at all. It doesn't have to be run with the ConsoleX system, which is good because I am designing further systems like the hip-hop idea, ConsoleH, to also use exactly the same bank of controls, in hopes that if anybody actually got one of these other than me, and you can, it's available now. I don't get anything from that, by the way. If anybody else gets one of these other than me, they can use it for all manner of different things, notably including if I succeed in making ConsoleH, and it's a very big deal and it works super well. Anybody having one of these would also be able to apply it to ConsoleH, or indeed have ConsoleX channels and ConsoleH channels all in the same mix and have the same thing apply to both of them. That would be very cool. That's my hope. Lastly, what's this stuff about? These are nice faders. I'm quite happy with them. It's solid. They're not wobbly or anything like that. They're nice faders. And we've got 12 of them. And my idea with Airwindowmation is, so far, although if anybody wants to work on making this possible for other stuff, that would be great. I've got this set up as a Reaper script. And what Airwindowmation does as a script is, if you color code tracks in your arrange window, say you color them blue. I've got it currently, if you download the script, it will use the Apple colors, but I also have Windows default colors sort of in there in the script, commented out, if I remember correctly. And it will take, with a little, there's a little fussing doing it, but I was able to get it done. And I'm not terribly clever, so it's like if I can do it, then there's doubtless other people who can do it. It will go through and assign every track in the mix the internal fader in ConsoleX, which for all the rest of this stuff is just whatever track is selected, but not this. It's whatever track is selected, but the internal fader in the instance of ConsoleX that you need to use in order to properly use it within the console system, because it has to do the fader before it does the internal processing. It'll assign all of those to whatever this fader tells it to. And that means you go through and color code all of your tracks, like all the guitars can be red. Say one of the guitars needs to be louder than the others. Here's how you do that. That individual track gets Stonefire and Air all turned up together, and that'll be an internal gain staging that will make it louder than the rest of them. Or if you have one of the guitars, or let's say here's a pink color, a magenta in the Apple colors, and you've got background vocals sitting on this. So those are all together, but one of the background vocals is too loud and it needs to balance with the rest of them. You would select that particular track and then go into Stonefire, Firestone, and turn all of those down unless you wanted to make them customized in some way, or back things down in the EQs perhaps, something like that. And then that single track will end up coming out quieter than the other ones, even though the fader knob for every one of those tracks will still be following this. And I'm talking about it's following this live. Airwindowmation script has all of these running live, and you can switch the colors around as you see fit. And this is also your master fader on the bus. Again, constantly live. It's always there. If you have something loud happening, whoop, and then it's become quiet again. And the most recent update on Airwindowmation is adjusting the internal. I had it set up in such a way where I had mixes happening, but all the mixes looked like this. Like the levels I was getting on fader were coming in extremely low, with the output fader being about 0.5, about halfway here. And that didn't seem right. And I figured out a way of fixing that, which you will have by the time this video is posted. And that is, now Airwindowmation goes through and it checks what the fader level is. And say you have 4 guitar tracks on red, and that's why it had to be pushed down here. Well, now what Airwindowmation does is it checks to see how many separate tracks are of each color, and then the value of the fader that's being sent to all of those tracks is divided by the number of tracks that are in there. So that means by half, and then by a quarter, and hey presto, it is at exactly the right level to work within the mix. What this means is that all of your faders will end up hanging around about mid-range there. They can go higher. In fact, if you push them, they will go substantially higher because there is a logarithm taper thing going on with the Airwindowmation calculations. But it also means that if you have stuff like this and go, okay, I now need to add 4 more guitar tracks on this red fader. You duplicate those tracks, you record the new guitars, and guess what? You don't actually have to turn it down to compensate for the new ones because it is still making it be roughly the volume of all of its colored tracks added together. And I'm real happy with how this is working. I have been desperately trying to get back to mixing with all of this. I've done enough of it to know that it works. And then I've gotten caught up in doing new plugins and getting very busy doing that. So there's the control surface. Then the question becomes, how do I get one of these things? And I'll tell you what I did. I bought it. They didn't give me this. I discovered these folks. They're in Argentina, and they do this for a living. They let you design your own thing. In fact, I'm going to show you how right now. So here is the website as you see it right at the moment. You can see they're taking orders for batch 36 and shipping late April 2025. They have something of a backlog. It's all sort of custom made. And I'll show you what that means. Firstly, here's ConsoleX. As you can see, this is what you'll get. It'll look like this. It's not going to have the colored stickers all over it. You can kind of see where the detents are on these, but it's mostly like this is largely just made to look really cool. And you might just like it that way. I like being able to see where the knobs are pointing, so I put the vinyl tape on there. And it'll look like this. It's $893. I think that doesn't include shipping, but and there is exactly what I have in real life. You got MIDI outputs and USB MIDI, which is what I'm currently using. You can connect it for brightness mode, but that is usually when you have all kinds of blinking lights and things, and I'm about to show you what that means. This is, and you can see, this design is not actually ConsoleX. As you see, I've got joysticks and sliders and things in the middle, but this that you're being shown, there is encoders with LEDs and stuff on it. That's what they mean when they say you can plug it into an external power source for better brightness, is they're talking about the stuff that you can do when you do this. And this is what you can do going into the Yaeltex, what they call a factory, which is literally what I'm looking at right now, and working out how you control these things. Remember how I had 4 sends in this little cluster up here? Well, turns out those are in different banks. The way you design stuff in like Yaeltex land is you specify groups of things. These are a group of controls that we can see here. See button elements and knob elements. And what we've got is a knob element like this that's been put in just the right place. It lets you rotate them, and that's how I did this. Which means if you want a ConsoleX control, but you think you can make it better than I did, go ahead. I'd love to see you try, and Yaeltex will be happy to acknowledge your attempt. You can hit the trash can thing to remove any of these little banks of things. There's your joysticks. They're available on this. Be sure to pick the right one. If you have one that's spring-loaded, it won't be very useful as an EQ. Your big long faders come in banks of 2. And they're all kind of designed to do their various things. Like this is a single bank of 4 controls, but then so are these and these. And I've only just made it look as if it's a set of 4 knobs colored blue for sends. You also get to rename them and label them. Like I can click on this, and you can see where all the boundaries for everything are. And then I believe, see, I'm reminding myself of how this works. Okay, so rotary elements. It'll be under appearance. See down here, it says build an appearance. Here's how you do this. This is how I labeled everything. And you can label things as you see fit. Caps. I have specified that the first cap is big and then the other ones are little. If you only like big knobs, you can override it and make it all big knobs. And then you see it says indicators, where you could have these little indicators around the outside edge if you want. They'll be printed onto it, much like mine. I left that stuff off for mine. Or a larger label like that. And text, you get to spell out what the text is and even pick from a limited number of fonts. Like here it says Montserrat and Armada. There's a variety of fonts that you can have. Excuse me. And that comes in handy if you want to design something else, because this is not the only available system. Mine's now coming in at $917. I think it's I'm not exactly sure. If you start customizing it and adding even more stuff, adding more parts will cause it to become more expensive. You have only so many of these things that you can use, and you can throw lots of more parts on. For instance, this little thing. We can take a look over here and see that you can have mini potentiometers, and it's got a price tag on there of $29 for each bank of those. So this little bit in here cost me $29 because I paid for all of this. But there's room to fit more. I've exceeded the number of modules for analog. We can't have as many of these, but guess what? I believe we can still have this many, so we can have 8 more little controls tucked away up here anywhere we want, and it'll make the whole thing more expensive. I believe we can also do things like digital. And let's find out if that's true. Yep, so we could have banks of buttons up there, and that is now costing me $1,000 because adding extra stuff to this will make it cost more. It's all based on the number of parts, the number of these banks that you include. Like the mini RGB buttons light up. That's why they have the extra power supply in there, is you can have so many buttons on these. But each bank of buttons will cost you $45, or in this case, $36 for the smaller bank. But they're RGB buttons. They're very cool. You can have little buttons and big buttons. This bank of big RGB buttons is $34. And this bank of little RGB buttons are $45. And they're not in the analog section, so you have room for them. So if you wanted to juice up your ConsoleX console to have even more, you can add buttons up here. Or, indeed, arcade buttons. Those are $50 because they're expensive. And if taking a giant unit like this one is too much, I've designed a smaller one. And this is like $524. And the way this one works is it's got just about everything that the big one has, with the difference. In this case, you get to have the output levels, the level boost and cuts, labeled kinda, sort of. I got bass, L mid, H mid, and treble here. So with this one, you decide whether the top button is frequency, the top knob is frequency, or the bottom knob is, or the top knob is resonance width, or the bottom knob is. And once you've decided that, you assign these ones to like frequency and these ones to resonance, and then these are your output levels. And it didn't have to take up the space with joysticks. Here are the controls that make up the dynamics, namely if you've got the compression. Rather than having the thresholds sort of piled up on top of each other like this, in vertical stacks, with the itty-bitty one, you've got just these sliders, and you just read it across, like the fire compression is ratio, threshold, attack, and release. And the stone, ratio, threshold, attack, and release. And then the gate for fire is ratio, threshold, sustain, and release, and so on. So it would be colored somewhat differently. You got 3 sends instead of 4. The discontinuity sits up here rather than anywhere else. And right down at the bottom, we've got the high pass, we've got that range control for stonefire and air, and the low pass, and the pan, and in this case you would not be using Airwindowmation because there are no faders. Unless, of course, you got this, and then you got one of these for the faders, because as long as you can run multiple MIDI control surfaces, this is a Music Thing modular, itty bitty, it's 8 MU. You have to build this yourself. You might notice that the fader travel is simply not as big as on the full-on ConsoleX, but you could get the itty bitty, the mini ConsoleX from Yaeltex, have this complete arrangement of different tone controls operating on a track-by-track basis. And this is everything that's in the big one except for the bank of faders. All of the things that are in the big one are also available here. And then back to the big one. As you can see, that is more expensive than the little one. At one point I made a itty bitty one, because you can get an even smaller box than this, and it is even more affordable, although not as much as like building a kit that you bought from Funk. And you can get something like this. And that's why I'm making this video. I'll be linking to the various pages that you've just seen on the Yaeltex site. Again, they're taking orders for one of their batches, and they'll be getting done with the stuff that they're building around, I don't know, April or so. It's all handmade. Like this wood is like sustainably sourced from forests, and it's all being hand done. So if this is your jam, don't simply assume that you have to buy them exactly like this, because an interesting thing about Yaeltex is that they are very enthusiastic about having people design their own super customized MIDI controllers just for them. And I agree with that. So here's your ConsoleX control the way I use it. And in going and getting one, that also opens up the possibility for getting any variation on that you might like. And see if you can do better for your purposes than I've done. I think I've done a pretty good job of making the ultimate, specifically ConsoleX controller. But maybe you don't care about Airwindowmation. Maybe you'd like a bank of buttons for using it with Live or something like that. Well, knock yourself out, because that's what it's for. And if you do make a bank of buttons for using it with Live or something, don't ask me for help, because I have no idea how to make that work, but the Yaeltex people do. And on that note, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.